Good morning or good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Hebrew University webinar, Israel, Gaza, Lebanon, Where Are We Going? My name is Francine Hazan. I am with the Division for Advancement and External Relations of the Hebrew University, and we are delighted to have all of you with us because, as we say now, we are one. And we will be joined by members of our International Relations Department this evening. Some of us in Jerusalem, one of us out in the Bay Area in California. And we will discuss the current situation. No promises that we'll have all the answers, but we will try to give as thorough an analysis as we can. And we're very happy that you are with us and that you support us, and we really do feel you with us. So I will start by introducing Professor Yoram Haftel. He is the chair of the International Relations Department at the Hebrew University and the Giancarlo Elia Valori Chair in the Study of Peace and Regional Cooperation at the Department of International Relations. His research agenda touches on the sources, design, and effects of international organizations and international investment agreements. He has published a book on the relationships between the institutionalization of regional economic organizations and regional peace. His recent works examine such topics as the evolution of the global investment regime, the effect of economic crises on international organizations' durability and performance, and the relationships between overlap and authority of international organizations. So I can't think of anyone who would be more appropriate to open our webinar. Professor Haftel, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you very much, Francine. I'm delighted to be here tonight. Let me start by saying that I, like most Israelis, I'm still struggling to come to terms with the horrible and incomprehensible events of Saturday, October 7th. As someone who grew up in Kibbutz Elim in the Negev, these events hit home in the most literal sense. Luckily for my family and friends, this kibbutz is several miles east of the border with the Gaza Strip, so this community narrowly escaped Hamas's atrocities and crimes against humanity. Nevertheless, they are now evacuated from their home, mourning many friends from around the region and uncertain about their future. Let me now put my department chair hat and move to other things and say first that the Department of International Relations is the oldest, largest, and most distinguished in this field in Israel, offering degrees at the BA, MA, and PhD levels. The DIR's current 25 faculty members enjoy a high reputation for research and teaching excellence in a range of fields within the discipline, including international security, international political economy, international law, foreign policy, and diplomatic history. Let me also add that we currently have about 700 students, 550 or so at the undergraduate level, and another 150 at the master and PhD, our master and PhD students. This makes us one of the largest departments in the Faculty of Social Sciences and perhaps in the entire university. To the best of our knowledge, about 40% of these students, both men and women, were called for military duty since October 7th. Our main goal and challenge in the coming months and even years is to accommodate their needs and ensure that they can get back on track once the war is over. Let me now turn to our actual panel. As Francine said, we have 3 speakers from our department who can provide us insights on the topic of the day, on the war with Hamas. And I will present them by the order of their talks. And first is Dr. Daniel Sobelman. Dr. Sobelman is a lecturer in our department. He's also a research fellow with the Harvard Kennedy School's Middle East Initiative. His research revolves around asymmetric coercion, specifically in the context of contemporary Middle Eastern conflicts. Daniel is currently completing a book manuscript on asymmetric deterrence and rules of the games as exemplified in conflicts involving resistance, quote unquote, actors in the region, including the Lebanese Hezbollah, Iran, and very timely Hamas in the Gaza Strip, and Yemen's Houthi rebels. I will now turn the floor to Daniel. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. So, look, the current war, which began with what Hamas leaders have defined as a strategic blow to Israel, has really thrown us decades back, and this is clearly reflected in Israel's daily discourse, both as a country, as a government, as everyday conversations here. So, pogroms, the Holocaust, Israel's second war of independence, as Netanyahu yesterday put it, an existential threat, the fact that a couple of hundred Israeli civilians have been kidnapped into the Gaza Strip like some medieval raid. All of this will have a formative impact on this country. Obviously, we're all wondering how did we get here? Where do we go from here? So, since I only have a few minutes, really let me just lay out a few points, and maybe I can further elaborate in the Q&A. So obviously, this is an event of gargantuan magnitude, and wars in general are really too complex and multifaceted to be conclusively analyzed from one angle. In terms of international relations scholarship, it requires what we refer to as a levels of analysis approach that looks at the event starting from the immediate cause, meaning the tip of the iceberg, all the way down to the deep causes that created the conditions that ultimately produced a catastrophe of such magnitude. Now, for example, any explanation would have to bring into account the emergence and diffusion of certain technologies such as drones, the drones with which Hamas incapacitated Israel's surveillance system with pinpoint precision, with the fact that we all have GPSs, satellite imagery, etc. This really helped Hamas carry out this attack. Obviously, the political social crisis in Israel, the fact that Hamas deliberately unleashed this offensive on Simchat Torah when Israel's guards were down, the rise of an extreme right-wing government in Israel, which led Hamas to the conclusion, which they stated out loud, that they were in a now or never moment, and that it was in their interest to ignite a regional war. They said this in late August. The fact that Israel was deterred by Hamas and Hezbollah, but failed to acknowledge this fact, let alone consider the consequences. Now, I'd like to say a few words about just the geopolitical, the regional geopolitics aspect of this. So one of the most important developments that's occurred here in the region over the past several years, gained critical mass over the past several years, and I don't think that this was truly appreciated and understood, was the emergence and consolidation of a regional strategic camp, with the self-described axis of resistance, of which Hamas has become an integral part over the past few years. Now, this camp includes the various actors in the region that are currently taking part in this war, including Yemen, Yemen's Houthi rebels, Iraqi militias, Iran, Syrian militias that are all attacking U.S. bases in the region, Hezbollah, obviously, etc. So what we are seeing now is that this camp has really gained critical mass, or had gained critical mass in recent years, and that it has come, believe it or not, to pose what I believe is an existential threat to the state of Israel, not necessarily in the sense that they would come and invade and conquer Tel Aviv, but in the sense that to draw on nuclear deterrence literature or strategy, they could impose unacceptable costs on Israel. Now, the threat is so grave, just imagine, that it has required the deployment of U.S. aircraft carrier strike groups, less Hezbollah, right, at a time when we are dealing with the minor enemy in the Gaza Strip, lest Hezbollah and the axis of resistance join the fray. Now they have joined the fray, maybe not to the top of the escalation ladder, but they have joined the fray. Now, this fact alone, the very fact that Israel has needed massive U.S. intervention and U.S. Really strategic assets to be brought to the region in order to deter Hezbollah and Iran, this in itself will have a formative impact. Now, to go back to the axis of resistance as a strategic camp, as a geopolitical camp, I think that beyond the aspiration, their aspiration for a different anti-Western regional order that excludes Israel, excludes the United States, Westernism, etc. Resistance, muqawama, has also come to constitute an asymmetrical strategy, a strategy, the principles of which guide not just Hamas, but also the entire resistance camp, including Iran, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, etc. And apparently, even though the stronger side is a lot stronger than these actors, it still poses a serious and far-reaching challenge to these far superior actors. Now, this means, among other things, that what happens to Hamas in the Gaza Strip will affect Iran's and Hezbollah's threat perception and vital interests. And this is precisely the reason why this evening Hezbollah is firing rockets on Kiryat Shmona and Nahariya and Tzfat, and really has escalated to the next, like a couple of escalation rungs above where they had been until now. One thing that this war will make abundant clear, in my view, is that is really the fierce struggle over the regional order. So as a strategy, resistance, muqawama, poses a challenge, not just to Israel, but to the entire Western-oriented camp in the region, right? So you're talking about Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Egypt, Jordan, all the Western-oriented actors. And in this respect, I can't not think of, one of the, maybe, he said this as kind of a joke, but this is the reality. Henry Kissinger many years ago said that a war that is not harnessed in the service of reshaping diplomacy would be a wasted war. And on the first day of the Yom Kippur War, right, 1973, Kissinger was the one who said already in the first hours of the war that the United States cannot afford to let Soviet weapons defeat US weapons, because that would be a complete geopolitical disaster for the United States. But also on the first day of the war, he knew exactly how he wanted to harness this war, for the Yom Kippur War, in the service of really reshaping regional geopolitics. Now, this is the most, I think, since we are in this tragedy and this is where we are, I think this is the most useful thing, and probably the most important, beyond winning this war, beyond making sure that Israel defeats Hamas, whatever that means. This would be the most useful thing, I think, to think about at this moment, about how to really harness this war in order to reshape or really shape up a better regional order. And in that respect, I think that we need to be very realistic about the fact that short of completely and decisively defeating the entire Iranian camp, which I don't think is in the cards, all of us will have to reckon with them as a strategic force to be reckoned with, right? And to somehow come out of this tragedy, this catastrophe, this war, with a better vision and a better architecture on a regional level that would enable us to definitely not introduce, regional peace, but at least introduce some level of cold peace in the region, of some sort of modus vivendi, some new rules of the game. And I'd be happy, obviously, to discuss this further in the Q&A. And my time is up, so back to you, Johan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for your valuable insights. Our second speaker is Dr. Guy Laron. Dr. Laron is a senior lecturer in our department. Previously, he was a visiting assistant professor at Northwestern University, a visiting fellow at the University of Oxford, and most recently a term fellow at the Wilson Center in Washington, D.C. He's the author of two books. The first one is Origins of the Suez Crisis, and the second one is The 6 Day War. His op-eds and stories have appeared in The Guardian, The Nation, History Today, Haaretz, Le Monde Diplomatique, and American Prospect. Guy, please.
Thank you, Yoram, for this introduction. And also thank you, Daniel, for preparing the ground to what I want to talk about at the end of my presentation, which is how everything that is happening right now would affect the kind of regional order that the Biden administration would like to shape. But at first, I want to explain in what ways the Gaza crisis or the Gaza war is an international crisis and what is so. I mean, obviously, if Secretary Blinken is visiting Israel, if President Biden came here, the French president, Emmanuel Macron, was here, and also the German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz. So a lot of players in the international arena think this is worth their attention. But why and how? So if you think in the Pentagon and in the State Department on the 7th of October, and you think how this situation can get worse, you understand that it can get worse in two specific ways. One is it can become a nuclear crisis, because when the crisis began and Hezbollah threatened to join the fray, and Iran threatened to use that ring of fire that Daniel spoke about, of rocket fire that it created around Israel and equipped militias in Yemen and in Lebanon and Iraq and Syria with rockets that can reach Israel, you'd think that Israel would threaten, of course, to retaliate against Hezbollah, but that would mean that it would fight against an Iranian ally. Israel would also, feeling that its back is against the wall, would threaten to use the ultimate weapon, the bomb in the basement. And it has done so in the past. A decade ago, that was spoken about very frequently with an Israeli Minister of Defense, Shaul Mofaz, threatening very, literally to destroy the regime in Iran. So assuming that Israel would do that, other international players would have something to say about it, including Russia, for instance, that Iran just recently became its best buddy in the world, and Iran sold military equipment to Russia to help it with its military effort in Ukraine. Mentioning Ukraine, that's another aspect of the crisis, because if the confrontation between Israel and Hamas becomes a regional crisis and it is projected into the Persian Gulf, let's say in a way that in which Israel confronts Iran, then that situation, that makes it even more dire, because now that Europe has cut its energy ties with Russia, it's more dependent than ever on energy supply from the Persian Gulf. So if Europe would have to face both cutting energy ties with Russia and also some kind of a cutoff of energy supply, mainly oil, but also gas from the Persian Gulf, that would make it the worst energy crisis that Europe has experienced since at least 1979. So for all those reasons, the Biden administration has responded and responded forcefully. And I want to say that I think Biden and his team deserve high marks for how they responded to this crisis. because they understood that if you preempt, if you act in advance, you can shape the crisis in a way that wouldn't harm your interest and, of course, may even advance your interests in the region. So one thing that Biden did was to talk strongly and act toughly. Okay, he didn't just warn other enemies of Israel not to intervene in the crisis, saying, don't think about it, just don't. He also backed it up by sending 2 naval battle groups into the region. One is the Gerald Ford aircraft carrier, which is already here, and another is the Eisenhower aircraft carrier, which just recently crossed the Gibraltar Straits, and it's on its way to the Persian Gulf. And by doing so, he seems to be able to deter Iran and Hezbollah to join the fray. I mean, the Hezbollah is involved, but from the noises they're making, from the speeches they're making, they seem to be less enthusiastic about joining all in into this ongoing confrontation, and seem to be more aware of what they have to lose. Just the Gerald Ford itself can do great harm to Hezbollah, and indeed, it's in terms of its firepower, it's an overkill. So one thing that the Biden administration was able to do so far is localize the war, make sure that it will take place mainly between Israel and Hamas, and not between Israel and all the other players that Iran wants to push into the fire. The other thing that Biden, I think, achieved is controlling, in some way, the level of the flames and how long this crisis would go on. One thing that was a cause for concern for the Biden administration and representatives of the Biden administrations that were here, and also U.S. officers that visited Israel, were concerned about the fact that Israel doesn't have a clear plan in terms of how it wants to end this war, whether it wants to destroy Hamas completely, and if it wants to destroy Hamas completely, whether who would rule the Gaza Strip in the day after. So, so far, somewhat officially and somewhat less so, the Biden administration has put a clear plan on the table, putting the end goal as going back to the normalization process between Israel and Saudi Arabia that has everything to do with the Ukraine crisis, because the normalization process was supposed to create a physical axis, a railway line, perhaps a pipeline as well, between Saudi Arabia and Israel, and by doing so, connect the Persian Gulf more firmly to an energy-hungry Europe. Okay, so that's the end goal that the Biden administration has put on the table, that after this is over, we go back to the normalization process. That has been backed up by a recent interview by the Saudi foreign minister. And also, more specifically, is to make the Palestinian Authority, that currently rules parts of the West Bank, be the player that would rule Gaza in the day after, probably with Saudi funding and American backing. Now, the current cabinet in Israel might not like that, but at the same time, Israel is more dependent on American support and military assistance than ever before. So by putting the Gerald Ford and the Eisenhower aircraft carriers here, Biden also created a lever it can use a week from now, 2 weeks from now, to pressure the Israeli government to do what the Biden administration is interested that Israel would do, And that lever could be used by Biden saying, sorry, folks, the time is up. I need to pull the aircraft carriers out of the region. So if you won't do as I say, you might have to face the music alone. So, connecting back to how Daniel ended his presentation, I think the Biden administration does have a clear plan of how to use this crisis to change the regional order for the better. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Guy, for your thoughtful comments. Our third and last speaker is Dr. Or Rabinovitz. Or is a senior lecturer in our department and a visiting associate professor of Israel Studies at Stanford University. Her research explores such issues as nuclear proliferation, intelligence studies, and US-Israel relations. Her book, Bargaining on Nuclear Tests, which focuses on nuclear proliferation bargains, was published in 2014 by Oxford University Press. She contributes analysis and think pieces to Israel and US platforms, including the Washington Post Foreign Policy magazine and Haaretz. Or the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. I'm zooming in from the Bay Area in California. It's a very difficult, emotional time to be far and away. I teach a course on Israeli national security policy on campus. I'll share some of my thoughts with you. I'm an Israeli. I'm not an American. A lot of thoughts and feelings in the past couple of weeks. So just a few thoughts to follow up on what Daniel and Guy have contributed to the discussion. I think that for the Biden administration, it's crucially important to show non-treaty allies like Ukraine and Saudi Arabia what it looks like when you have the US in your corner. These are sorry, window popped up. These are guarantees and these are offers that the Biden administration really wants Saudi Arabia and Ukraine to have a very good look at what it means to have the US at your side, even if you're not a member of a NATO alliance. And it's crucially important for the administration to be a part of the order that's being reshaped, like Guy and Daniel mentioned. And I think it's very important. And of course, the fact that we're going into an election year will affect how things shape up. I think that from what I can tell in the coverage in the newspapers, the Biden administration and Biden himself, they are calculating that they may sustain a hit from voters that are not happy with the pro-Israeli stance that they're taking. And this is something that we may see shaping up in some of the reactions down the road. I want to take you back to something that I work on more closely, which has to do with nuclear proliferation in the Middle East. And I'm going to take you to my Twitter feed. So in the 48 hours following the October 7th attack, I saw a couple of very disturbing tweets. One of them was tweeted by Knesset member Tali Gottlieb. She's a member of the ruling Likud party. When I try to explain Tali Gottlieb's role, I usually try to tell American interlocutors that she's somewhat akin to a local Marjorie Taylor Greene, but with a different kind of flair. And Tali Gottlieb, and I'm quoting here basically verbatim because it shocked me so much. And again, she's a member of a ruling government. A member of the ruling government. She's a member of Likud. She said, and I'm quoting, Jericho missile, nuclear deterrence, doomsday weapons, may God save us, something like that. You can Google this. Jericho missile are the nuclear capable Israeli ballistic missiles that Israel has been developing since the 60s. So it kind of makes you wonder what that person was thinking. Another tweet that disturbed me was a tweet by Israeli journalist Shimon Riklin. He's a right-wing journalist, commentator, not journalist. Right-wing commentator closely aligned with the Netanyahu government, and he said, but why do we have nuclear weapons in the first place? And these tweets disturbed me very much. And I think that what Tali Gottlieb and Shimon Riklin kind of ran and smashed into a wall is the fact that nuclear weapons have nothing to do with terror organizations or the retaliation to terror organizations or the attempt to deter them. And Israel has never officially acknowledged the fact that it has nuclear weapons, but that being said, there's a very big body of literature on the development of Israel's nuclear weapons and its strategy. And everything I'm going to say basically builds on what we know based on the literature and an open reports. I'm not privy to anything, to any private information. And it's important to understand that in terms of Israeli nuclear doctrine, the doctrine only talks about, as far as we can assume and know, the doctrine refers to Israel considering whether or not to use nuclear weapons in case of an armored invasion by state armies into the Green Line, the case of the annihilation of the Israeli Air Force, or widespread use of WMDs against Israeli population. And as far as we can tell, Israeli nuclear weapons were put on alert on 3 different instances in Israel's history. The first in 1967 was when we think, from what we know, or what we can ascertain, that 2 rudimentary devices were put on alert in case the Egyptian would consider deploying chemical weapons against Israel. In 1973, from what we can ascertain, there was a nuclear alert. Forces were put on nuclear alert. Again, we don't know exactly what happened, but we can outline according to some information that did trickle out. And in 1991, during the Gulf War, from what we understand, this was actually commented on by American officials like Colin Powell and others. We believe that the same Jericho missiles that Tali Gottlieb tweeted about were most likely put on alert. And I think that what Tali Gottlieb and Shimon Ricklin got wrong is the fact that what we're seeing now in Iran's strategy of death by 1,000 cuts, of encircling Israel by non-state actors armed with drones and missiles and rockets, some of them fitted with precision-guided kits, is the fact that that aspect of deterrence was so successful that following the 1973 war, the conflict and the attempt to undermine Israel was tunneled into using those non-state actors and the technology and the weapon that we just described. And I don't think that nuclear deterrence is relevant for this equation. I don't think that Israeli decision makers think that nuclear deterrence is relevant to deterring Hezbollah and Hamas. Where do we think that, where should we be concerned? And this is something that Guy pointed at, and I agree with him, and I'd like to expand. Our understanding is that Iran, to a great degree, was busy building up Hezbollah with a major consideration of deterring an Israeli attempt to take out Iranian nuclear facilities by aerial strike. So this was, in a sense, a form of a rather successful deterrence attempt by Iran. And the question is, are the Iranians willing to risk Hezbollah and risk using Hezbollah? Do they feel that they're in a use it or lose it situation on the one hand? And on the other hand, the flip side of this consideration is, do they feel confident enough with respect to their nuclear infrastructure and their nuclear program? Do they think that the program is mature enough to make them realize, or to nudge them on to waste the Hezbollah card, to use it? So if you're in a use it or lose it kind of approach, you're just going to use it because you think that you don't need to fear a strike because your program is mature enough. And this is one of the considerations that we think we see being played. And just a few thoughts about being an Israeli who teaches a course on Israeli national security policy on a campus, an American campus. Specifically, first of all, every day when I walk to my office, I go by slogans which call either for the destruction of Israel, and other difficult statements. I'm not going to go into everything now. And there are, of course, protests and other forms of events happening on campus. Specifically, my course is filled with students who are not students who attend these kind of events and protests. So an undergraduate student at Stanford actually goes and enlists and signs up for a course taught by an Israeli professor from the Hebrew University about Israel's national security policy, is someone that is somehow interested in what's happening in Israel. Some of my students are Jewish, some of them have families in Israel. And when this first happened, 48 hours after the attack, we had our lessons on Monday morning. half the class showed up completely devastated, in tears. They're looking for a lot of support. Many of them don't feel that they have access to such support on campus. They personally feel persecuted and harassed on campus. Many of them perceive themselves as being targets of hate speech, and they're just terrified. Many of them are just terrified. So I think there is a lot of relevance to offering these kind of courses and to having Israeli academics on campus. So I'm going to leave it at that, and Yoram, over to you.
Thank you very much, Or, for your insightful thoughts. And this wraps up our 3 presentations. Hopefully that was not too depressing, but the situation is pretty difficult, as you can understand from the talks. And I'm handing the mic back to Francine for the rest of the session.
Thank you, Yoram. I'm trying to get my video started, but it doesn't really matter. You guys can see my picture. We have a lot of questions and all of them outstanding. So what I'm going to try to do is ask the questions in as geographically diverse a way as I can. We have a question from Romina Yalonetsky from Peru. Okay, now I will start my video. Okay, Romina asks, what does defeating Hamas really look like? Why are we comparing Hamas to ISIS, even though the realities in the Gaza Strip and Iraq and Syria are different? I'll throw it out there. You guys decide who should answer.
So if I may say a few words about this. Defeating Hamas, let's put it this way. A few days ago, Khalid Mishal, who is one of the leading Hamas figures, said that just like the Vietnamese and just like the Afghans versus the Soviets, and just as the Iraqis and other liberation movements in history who had sacrificed millions in order to liberate themselves, they are also willing to sacrifice far more than 5,000 Palestinians in Gaza. Regardless of how many or how much civilian destruction Israel inflicts upon the Gaza Strip, that's not going to change anything. As long as Israel is incapable of destabilizing Hamas's military system, right? So reaching really Hamas's critical vulnerabilities as a resistance actor. And we see that this is not easy at all. If it is at all possible, with the assets and military commitment that Israel is or is not willing to really bring to the table. Because Hamas has 500 kilometers of underground tunnels in the Gaza Strip with tens of thousands of fighters and Israeli hostages. And decisively winning this war Hamas militarily would take years. So this is really the challenge that we're facing. This applies not just to the Gaza Strip, it would apply to Lebanon. It would also apply to Iran. It would also apply to Yemen. It's easy to inflict civilian destruction on a vast scale, but very difficult to really reach the critical vulnerabilities of these actors.
Thank you, Daniel. Does anyone else want to weigh in? If not, I'll
I'll just say that this is, and I think we kind of hinted at this. The fact that Hamas was allowed to grow exponentially and develop its military capabilities and depends on when we want to start the discussion. We can, I think a very good point is June 2007 when Hamas occupied by force in the Gaza Strip and kicked out the Klan and the representative of the Palestinian Authority. I think it's an oversight of a strategic scale that, of course, in Israel we haven't started analyzing, and it has to do with really a lack of leadership and a lack of strategic thinking. And what we're faced with now is, and Daniel mentioned it, so I'm not going to repeat it, is the fact that we're faced with an organization that's quite content with saying half of Gaza being burnt up. And we don't have an elegant answer to that. There's no one good way of solving the situation. There's no one way where you can basically get rid of Hamas while minimizing casualties to a bare minimum, because their strategy is actually to sacrifice them.
If I can actually add something and perhaps turn to Dr. Soberman next, there was a question about the comparison to ISIS, right? And I think that's an interesting question because I think until October 7th, there was some thought in Israel and in other regional actors as well, perhaps in the West, that Hamas is a political actor that can negotiate or can take responsibility as a government in the Gaza Strip. And I think that atrocity that happened on October 7th kind of made this assumption, bank. And in this sense, I think the comparison to ISIS makes sense in the sense that this is an actor that is not interested in negotiations or in any settlement or in actually building Gaza. And in this sense, I think that links to what Or was saying, is that that means that we really have to get rid of this actor, or at least weaken it substantially. And again, Daniel knows more than me about that, so I was wondering if he had anything to add on kind of the comparison to ISIS in this sense.
Yeah, so obviously one of the things that, I mean, you just can't help but not think about this. What was the purpose of Hamas's, really this medieval style raid, right? Because this is, I don't think anyone had this in mind, the atrocities that Hamas purposely, deliberately committed in all these towns around the Gaza Strip. And apparently they had plans to reach places like Kiryat Gat, right? So in a sense, it could have been much worse. I think that we have to assume that Hamas is strategically motivated and that they have a strategic mindset. We cannot dismiss them as a strategic organization. And I think that what they had in mind was, first of all, that they were going to inflict upon Israel a strategic blow that would ignite the entire region. I am certain that they are now, even though Hezbollah in the north, as we were seeing, these right now, literally, is really firing rockets into Tzfat and really relatively deep into Israel. They expected a lot more from Hezbollah, from Iran. In fact, on the first day of, on October 7th, immediately, Haniya said, he called upon our strategic partners in the region, this is your moment. And had Hezbollah indeed seized upon that moment and that opportunity, the first few hours, we would have been fighting Hezbollah fighters in Tzfat, and who knows. So in terms of what they were thinking that they were doing, I think they were thinking in terms of really, first of all, ignite regional conflagration and breaking our spirit as Israelis to just really frustrate us to a degree that we would not think about this place as a place that we would want to raise our children or grandchildren in. And I think that in the longer run, what does victory mean? Victory will have been achieved maybe in the future if we see that the country has recuperated if people living in the Otef Aza and the Gaza envelope had returned to those communities, that they will have met.
Thank
Daniel,
you.
if I can just shortly, cutting off Qatari money to Hamas wouldn't inflict damage on the organization right now?
I don't think so, because first of all, they have Iranian money, they have Iranian funding, and you know what? It's not a lot of funding. You're not talking about billions and billions of dollars. So I answered this in one of the questions of Q&A. How much does it cost the Iranians to really to maintain the Houthis in Yemen or Hezbollah? Really great bang for their buck, because the asymmetrical strategy that they are pursuing is in fact very, very effective. And you see that it's not, once the weaker party is willing to sacrifice potentially millions of people, it is extremely difficult to uproot these organizations. And because it's extremely difficult, if at all possible, to uproot these organizations, you somehow, at the end of the day, they're banking on the prospect that you, even though you're a million times stronger than they are, you will have to come to terms with them. And that's the strategy that they're banking on.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have a number of questions that can be combined, so I'm going to kind of make a mash of them and put them out there for you guys. One question is basically, what comes next for the Palestinians? Can Hamas really be eliminated? Is the PA, Palestinian Authority, a viable alternative in Gaza? And how would you see the next step for the Palestinians?
Is it okay if I go first?
Sure.
So I don't think, I think it's clear to all observers that Hamas as this one big entity is not something that you can annihilate. It's a complex movement, and it enjoys support. Certainly the social aspects of it enjoy support. I don't think it's serious to talk about the annihilation of Hamas. You can discuss, at length the exact painful move you want to inflict on some of its military capabilities, and we'll see in the months ahead what exactly is possible or not. But I think that what we have to consider, and at least it's my own personal opinion, is that we have to figure out how we're going to revive the two-state solution. In the long term, it's not something that's going to happen in the short term. I think that we have to come to grips with the fact that it was a massive strategic failure on the Israeli part to strengthen Hamas and weaken the Palestinian Authority with the hopes that you can deter Hamas and keep it weakened, and under the false estimation that Hamas was interested in maintaining some form of passable living standards in the Gaza Strip, which obviously was not the case. And the question is, how do you make sure that you finally find yourself on the path which leads to that direction? Currently, if Palestinian Authority figures will try to run the Gaza Strip, assuming we're the day after some form of a military campaign, they won't, and I'm being very polite here, they won't enjoy the support of the local population. It's not, you can't just throw Palestinian Authority people there and expect, and hope for the best. You have to somehow figure out how to work with existing civil society organizations there, which may be, partially affiliated with Hamas and partially not affiliated with Hamas, but it's not realistic to just expect Abu Mazen's people to march in there and rule the Gaza Strip. I think that the way forward is to think about how to engage with the Egyptians and the Saudis and larger members of the Arab world in setting up Palestinian self-government. Yeah.
Thank you all.
If
Guy?
I may add, So we know from some polls taken in the Gaza Strip that if not a majority, there's a sizable part of the population in Gaza that detests Hamas rule and would like to see it go away. There's a chasm between how the Hamas elite lives and the rest of the population lives, in terms that the Hamas leadership lives in relative luxury in the Strip. So it's not impossible to think about a future in which the Palestinian Authority gets into the Gaza Strip and rules it. And of course, not all of it is dependent on the Palestinians alone. Israel is the stronger player, and the moves it would take in the West Bank would be very influential in strengthening the Palestinian Authority and make it influential enough to unite the Palestinian government with the one in Gaza. So a lot depends on the path that the Israeli government would walk on.
Thank you,
If I
Kai.
if I just may add one wrinkle to this. So I mentioned earlier that well, the number 2 guy in Hamas, which is a guy named Saleh al-Aruri, on August 25th, he gave an interview to Al-Mayadeen in Lebanon, where he said, given that we are now facing the most extreme right-wing government in the history of Israel, and we're dealing with serious people who are strategic and who have a vision, our conclusion is that we have between 2, maximum 3 years before the West Bank and the Palestinian cause is finished. Because at this pace, within 2 or 3 years, there will be 2 million settlers in the West Bank, which is why we have an interest right now in a regional war with Israel. Now, wars, beyond the fact this entire situation has the makings of a regional war, wars have unintended consequences. Hamas could cease to exist at the end of this war, and still there is still the possibility that this horrific attack will have set a diplomatic dynamic at the end of which, as President Biden now is saying, there is no going back to the status quo ante of October the 6th. And we have to, and he is already reviving the 2-state vision. The 2-state solution, and the Palestinians as a factor, not a humanitarian factor, as a political, as a military factor, I think they're back big time. And I think that it's going to be very hard to ignore that from now on. So there's really no knowing how this evolves further, but don't be surprised if one day historians will say that this Hamas assault had in fact saved the Palestinian cause. That is also a possibility. Sadly, maybe.
Thank you. Thank all of you. We have so many outstanding questions. I'm just trying to combine as many as possible and keep them in the areas of expertise of our speakers. So one that has come up several times has to do with the post-war new Middle East order. What would this look like? Could there be normalization in the region? What kind of security guarantees could be given to Israel in this new order? And who would be the major players? Would China be a player? Would Russia be a player? And obviously the role of the US.
Should I?
Go ahead.
I think, yeah, let's start with Russia and China. Both of them don't have enough of power projection capabilities. That's fancy language to say it's hard to think about either Russia and certainly China doing what the U.S. is doing in the Middle East, which is ensuring the freedom of navigation from and to the Persian Gulf. Now, China wouldn't do it, and it would be against its decade-long policies of being a free rider in the Middle East and enjoying the security umbrella that the U.S. is creating in the region, and pursue opportunities for fruitful investment in various economies of the region, but not taking responsibility for its security. And you can't see Russia doing that in the foreseeable future. It's damaged and bruised because of its war effort in Ukraine. It can even influence some of its regional neighbors, say Azerbaijan or Kazakhstan, which are increasingly adopting a more independent foreign policy than they used to in the past, when they feared the Russian bear, and they don't, at least not right now. So the only player that can, outside the region, that can shape the regional order, that would be the United States, if it has an administration that is interested in doing so. It has all the panoply of tools to do so, from the State Department to the Pentagon to a big role in the UN. So it's up to the US to make those decisions, and it's the only player that I haven't said anything, by the way, about the EU, but I think the best definition that someone used for the EU and its role so far in the crisis, that it's a useful NGO, but not more than that. Yeah, that's what I want to say.
Yes, the question of who's going to be the next US president is, I think, was probably never more important or never more consequential to the Middle East. Maybe it's something that we say before each presidential election cycle, but it will have very deep effects if we have someone like Trump or someone like Biden. If they both end up running, actually, you know, we'll have to see. I think that from the Russian perspective, the really doubling down on Cold War geostrategic style thinking of aligning itself now with Iran as opposed to the US and Israel is something that caught Netanyahu by surprise. I don't think he counted on that. He should have, but it just goes, I think it amplifies the fact that despite of what Netanyahu has been trying to do in the past couple of years of tearing Israel from the liberal Western order and trying to push it towards regimes that were friendly to Putin, or even, you know, his famous photograph on the Ayalon, you know, shaking his hand with Putin, or realigning himself with Viktor Orban in Hungary and stuff. I think that it really blew up in the face of reality. Israel needs to deeply understand that it's deeply rooted in the liberal American Western-led order and needs to realign its interest accordingly.
Thank you. And I think that we have one more combined question, and I'm going to explain that it comes from Julian Biller, Ronald Gaster, Randy Milner, Eitan Vax, Wallace Weber, and Alan Grill. And all together, this is basically the question of public opinion, image, particularly on university campuses in the US, Canada, the UK. Is there anything that can be done, in your opinion, about changing the narrative to a certain extent and influencing public opinion in a different way?
I think we have to be realistic. I don't think that there's this one magic bullet or this one strategy that you can employ that's gonna defang the venom that you see on the American campuses. You can, you know, offer your support to the Jewish students, to the Israeli students. I think it's the government's responsibility to figure out how it wants to properly advocate what its its goals and means and what it has been doing. Personally, except for supporting my students and teaching them more about the region, there isn't this one thing you can do. And so if Daniel, Guillaume, if you have other thoughts on this, I welcome it, but I'm not I don't have one.
I would, I guess, one point that I made earlier. I think it's a very difficult, it's going to be very difficult to change public opinion for people who have their one-sided view, as I saw in one of the questions, right? But I think what recent events showed, as I said before, is that Hamas is not interested in Palestinian independence. Is not interested in being an actor that can be useful in some way for the Palestinians. And I think many people in the West believe that will still associate Hamas with freedom fighting and Palestinian nationhood and things like that. And I think the atrocity that it committed on October 7th really showed that it's not this kind of factor. I think this should be communicated very forcefully to public opinion in the West. In comparison to ISIS is sensible in this sense to convince people that this is not really the actor that they thought it is. And maybe that can help. Again, it's going to be very difficult to change minds, but maybe over the long haul, we can do some things along these lines.
If I may just add a tail to what I wanted to say. So we were hanging posters of the hostages, and my second half walked around the campus to put up some more posters, and he saw someone taking them down, and he went to talk to that person. In a pleasant way. This wasn't like a violent exchange of curses. And that person told him that there was no rape and there was and civilians weren't hurt. And and a person like that, there's no amount of evidence you can show them that will convince them that what Hamas did on October 7th was negative. And obviously, these are also not the people that are our natural interlocutors. And we need to figure out how we can talk to other people. But many of these people are lost causes. And I think it's also important to understand that.
I think that to the extent that this is possible, I think we need to introduce nuance to these kind of people. I don't know, maybe it's impossible to that specific individual that Oli is referring to, but any nuance that can be introduced to the discussion about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, to this conflict, would be really a blessing. I don't see any problem with characterizing what happened as a monstrous terrorist raid that, again, came from it came from the medieval times, and at the same time agree that this doesn't preclude the fact that Israel is far from being Mother Teresa, and that this doesn't preclude the fact that the Palestinians of the Gaza Strip are suffering, and that the Palestinians too come to the table with solid, a solid cause and a just cause. And that's exactly the issue at hand, is that we have the Zionist movement and the Palestinian national movement, and we're kind of like Siamese twins. And we need to make sure that both twins stay alive, otherwise they die into each other. And that's the sort of nuance that I think people should realize.
Well, with great reluctance, I think that we're going to close this webinar. I want, first of all, to thank very much the International Relations Department of the Hebrew University, Professor Haftel, Dr. Rabinovich, Dr. Laron and Dr. Sobelman for making the time to give us really a very thoughtful and thought-provoking presentation on a very, very complicated issue that is very painful to, I'm sure, all of us who are here in this community this evening. I want to mention that next Sunday, we will be having another webinar, Fighting for the Israeli Hostages, the Hebrew University Legal Clinics at Work. We would love for you to join us. Another issue that is very pressing in Israeli society and has become an international issue. Our 229 hostages in Gaza and the need to bring them home. Thank you again for joining us. As we said earlier, we are one and we appreciate you and your support. And we'll see you hopefully next week. Shalom from Jerusalem.